struggle, 342 years of struggle against colonialism and apartheid. We will, when we get to that point, as we will, reflect on how far we have come as a country in improving the lives of our people, the quality of their lives, and also, and more importantly, in entrenching a culture of democracy and human rights. A culture that, as we look around the world, we're finding either diminishing or being completely destroyed in other locales in the world. We will reflect on whether we are still on course to uphold that culture which we held with our two hands when we went to the polls on the 27th of April in 1994. We will reflect on the progressive policies that have enabled millions of our people to be lifted out of absolute poverty, and that have provided how this new democratic system has provided basic necessities which they didn't have at hand on a wholesome or on a universal basis, such as housing, access to electricity, to water, and other basic services. We will also at the same time acknowledge where we have not achieved enough, where the expectations and the aspirations of our people have not been met. It's going to be like looking at a balance sheet. When you look at the balance sheet, you look at your assets and you look at your liabilities, both positive and negative. That we will have to do. It's going to be a balance sheet moment or examination moment for us. But we will also look at the promise of the democracy that our people had, whether it has fallen short or not. As we consider the great achievements of our democracy, we must be forthright about one of the great weaknesses where we have fallen short, and that is with regard to corruption. All South Africans suffer from corruption when goods and services and resources meant for public benefit are misappropriated, they are mismanaged, they are stolen, and when that happens, it is the poor who suffer the most. Corruption carries a huge opportunity cost, but it imposes a huge burden on the lives of our people. Economic growth is stifled and businesses suffer. Development stalls and institutions across the board, both in the public sector and in the private sector, also fail. Corruption has wounded our democracy in a number of ways and has also shaken our people's faith in our institutions. If corruption is not curbed, arrested, or stopped, the greatest damage will not be in the funds that are stolen, and funds are stolen, or the jobs that are lost. It will be in damaging our democracy. It will be in making our people have less confidence and have less trust in our democracy. It is therefore our shared responsibility as we celebrate 30 years of democracy to build a society in which corruption is minimized or eliminated, in fact, has no place at all. To do so, we must challenge the contention that corruption is a creation of our democratic order. Because there are people in certain circles who believe that This is a new invention that came post-1994. Corruption in South Africa has many deep roots. As we have noted before, apartheid itself was both morally and materially corrupt. Even as apartheid laws enabled the theft and the unbridled theft of resources that rightfully belong to the people of South Africa, there were many in the administration, in state institutions, in the Bantustans, so-called governments, and in business, who flouted even those corrupt laws to enrich themselves. And sometimes we never give a moment to think about how corruption permeated all of society during the years of apartheid misrule. Having fought a just struggle against this system of apartheid, it was our intention that the overthrow of apartheid would herald a new era of integrity, of honesty, and ethical conduct by all who are in positions of responsibility. We sought not merely to change the political system, but to build a new nation on a fundamentally different moral code or foundation. Our constitution, which embeds the values of social justice, human, is the most powerful instrument we have to fight. Often dubbed as one of the best constitutions in the world, this is the instrument that our people have at hand. The people of South Africa are the guarantors of the integrity of the political, social, and economic life of our country. After all, it was the people of South Africa in all their various formations who stood up against not only apartheid, but who also stood up against state, who through their democratic institutions established and took action to support the commission that had been established against difficult odds. Even when the head of that commission was being criticized, pummeled with lots of attacks, it was the people of South Africa who supported the work of that commission. The establishment of that commission was an affirmation of the democracy. And this, in many ways, is what distinguishes us from a number of countries in the world. In a number of countries, corruption is endemic. People know that it happens. It happens even in your best so-called democracies. You know, when we went through, I digress for a minute, when we went through the COVID-19 PPEs, the personal protective equipment, and mistakenly, and that's where I sometimes say, yeah, we made a mistake. I also made a mistake to say, yes, we will have these PPEs distributed and sent to our people because this was a moment of great need. And people set up companies just 2 or 3 days before PPEs were made available, and the money was there. They saw it coming and they grabbed opportunity. But it was interesting to read that the experience that we went through was similar to the experience that other more developed economy countries went through, the UK, the US, and many other countries, and of course, a number of African countries. It's not that it was sobering, but what we did afterwards was for me much more important, because one, we learned a lesson when we had to now have to deal with vaccines. We decided that this is centralized. It will only be distributed, not bought by a whole number of other. So we had learned a lesson. But the other important lesson was to ensure that we follow up that act of corruption. We set up what we call the Fusion Center, which brought together the various and crime-fighting agencies, from SARS, tax collector, right through to the National Prosecuting Agency and the SIU and the NP and the Hawks and all that. They worked together. Often, for the first time, we were able to have proper integration in tackling a particular problem in government, where institutions worked together to good effect. But what we did was also different from many other countries. These were investigated. I appointed the SIU, Special Investigating Unit, to follow up on the various cases, and those are now being prosecuted, and the money is being brought back. I haven't read much about those types of follow-ups in other countries. I had what has ensued after the PPE were issued and the contracts were issued. This is based on how our democracy works and is meant to work. This is based on the solid foundation that we have and the instrument in the hands of our people, which is our Constitution. Now, there are many other things that we do which I find quite different from other countries. The work that is being done, for instance, by our public, and we spoke about them, Professor Pachalia, you spoke about them. The SIU, for instance, the Special Investigation. Prior, in the years, in the last 5 years, these have been the most active years of the SIU. And they have led to a lot of convictions and investigations. And as you heard, the Hawks are investigating up to 21,000 cases. It means work is being done. The National Prosecuting Agency is also at work. What had happened to the NPA, it had been weakened, it had been captured, completely, almost destroyed. The skilled people had left, or they had been railroaded out. And when you talk about prosecutors, you're talking about people who should know their craft. Our courts, our judiciary, independent judiciary, which even at times and does its work, it's not captured. I digress again for a minute. Some years traveling to some of I read a newspaper which is published in one of those countries. And one article spoke about how the Chief Justice of a particular country had met somebody in the basement. This was a newspaper article. Met somebody in the basement of a hotel and had received a suitcase full of money. The Chief Justice. And so this reporter was saying, this is what happened to the Chief Justice. And in the same newspaper, I read about the experience or what had happened or what another judge had done in another country on our continent. This judge had gone to pay his condolences to his wife's family. father had passed away, so he had gone. It's beyond paying your condolences, part of the family. This judge meets somebody at the funeral, and this person wants to give this judge an envelope, and the judge refuses to take the envelope. The following day, Chief Justice, was the hearing of a case where this person who was trying to give him the envelope was involved, and he was the presiding officer. And the judge says, before we start these proceedings, I want to recuse myself because this man who's standing here came to my wife's father's home, and he tried to give me an envelope full of money. I refused. But today he's standing right here before me, and I'm the presiding officer. I cannot preside over his. And these were two stories of judges in two countries, which I shall not name, on our continent, that tell a different story. The one, a judge is captured, the other one, he's resisting. We are proud to have a judiciary that is not captured, that refuses to be captured, if anybody tries. So we must be proud of that. Now, the work of the State Capture Commission was a watershed moment in our history. And as one travels around the world, people often say, you guys, you wash your in public. And I said, that's what our democracy is all about. This is South Africa's democracy at work. Not only did our democracy is all about. This is South Africa's democracy at work. Not only did the commission lay bare the extent and the depth of state capture and corruption, but it also presented the country with the means, both remedy and to deal with the corruption, and also to create conditions that would prevent its recurrence. Viewed overall, the recommendations of the State Capture Commission have provided the country with a clear way forward. And what the commission laid bare was the extent to which corruption had become so pervasive across the state and across society. During the life of the commission, Justice Zondo would meet me as state president and come and say, President, we need more money. We need more time. And he kept coming, and I kept saying, yes, we'll give you more time and more money, because I saw the importance of the work. But one of the conversations that we then had was the limitation of the work that the commission was doing in terms of scope. Because once they had, lifted the lid on corruption, they then realized that it is much more endemic than we had imagined. And it was both private sector and public sector driven. And it had many actors, as Professor Kachalia was saying earlier, many, many actors indeed. And one of the things he reflected on, and which I also reflected on, was that it's not only at the national departments level or state-owned enterprises level. Much of it manifests itself at local government level. And we both bemoaned the fact that there wasn't enough time, there wasn't enough money, because that is where quite a lot of corruption resided. Now, all this means that we require a society-wide response that marshals all our resources, our capabilities, in a concerted effort to end corruption in all its forms. As part of this effort, last year I appointed this National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council to advise the government, and I would even say to advise all of us, on the necessary means to address the structural causes as well as the consequences of corruption in our country. Part of the work of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council is to provide advice on the implementation of the policy and institutional reforms contained in the recommendations of the State Capture Commission. Over the last 5 years, we have invested significant resources to rebuild the law enforcement agencies and other bodies that were devastated by corruption. And I often say to people, what Justice Zondo investigated, in many, many ways, is just the tip of the iceberg. And in fact, the full manifestation of state capture is being, the full impact of state capture is being manifested now, because it is almost like, what do you call, is it an amoeba or an octopus that has tentacles that run all over and that grab, and you cut its head off, the tentacles still operate and they run. So we are having to deal with that. The state criminal justice agencies were debilitated, many of them were destroyed, and we are having to rebuild them. We're having to make sure that they gain more capability. I'll talk about this in a little while. We appointed new leadership with a track record and integrity and capability to tackle crime and corruption. And through that, we began introducing a new system. And I often say, what we've got to correct is the system. To correct and rebuild the system, thereafter appoint the right people, and after that, know that those people will implement the correct processes. So it's not an overnight process. It's a process that requires diligence. And in appointing those people, I have decided that we want to be as transparent as possible. We want as many of our people to get engaged so that it is not seen as the sole preserve of the president, where the president will appoint people that he preserves who will foster his own intentions. We are now in the process of developing legislation that will insulate the appointment and removal processes for key positions shown to be vulnerable to state capture. In 2018, we established the NPA Investigating Directorate to focus on state capture and other serious crimes. And this used to be called in the past the Scorpions, and they were dismantled. Now it is more or less, and with the nice bells and whistles, going to do the work that is going to focus on corruption. We established the special tribunal to enable the special investigating unit to fast-track the recovery of public funds. In November 2020, Cabinet adopted the National Anti-Corruption Strategy with 6 strategic pillars anchored, and we anchored the deliberations of this national dialogue. That will anchor your deliberations. The strategy is an anti-corruption compact, since it is all of society, as I've said, that must get involved in this fight against corruption, both in the state, in business, in society. It's also alluded to by Professor Kachalia. Now, the strategy fills an important gap in that it focuses on preventative measures that complement the actions of our law enforcement agencies and other constitutional bodies in responding to corruption. The strategy aims to stop corruption before it occurs. in my discussions and our discussions even in cabinet with the Auditor General. I once raised with the Auditor General, you audit, that's what auditors do. They audit the after effect of any financial transactions. And I said, is there no way where we can predict where this is going through your audit processes and come up with clear measures to stop this plane from crashing? And we effected a legislative amendment to give the Auditor General more or less that capability as well, and we need to strengthen it. The areas the strategy covers include ethical leadership, protection, and support of whistleblowers. Now, this is where the National Anti-Corruption Body has now come forward, as Professor Kacharya was saying, with really good and effective recommendations, which we are going to implement. How we should protect whistleblowers, because in our own country, we know that when whistleblowers speak out, they are targeted from internal structures as well as from external structures. Some of them are even killed, have been killed in the recent past. So they have come up with very good strategies or recommendations of doing so. We've also got to look at the integrity of the procurement systems, because that is where the money is found. And that is where all these thieves, thugs, focus their attention on, because that is the center that dispenses the resources that they want to steal. But we also have to deal with capacity building in our law enforcement agencies. The NDPP has often come and said, we need more money, President. Because we've got to go and employ people who are more capable, because many of those people were railroaded out of the NPA and they've spread throughout the world and throughout many other places. And therefore, we need to capacitate. This is precisely what Advocate Badoy has been doing, to rebuild the capacity. And if she ever gets a moment to talk, she will tell us how she found the place hollowed out and how she has had to rebuild that capacity. Now, while these individuals and companies that have enriched themselves at the expense of the people must face the consequences of their misdeeds, we must go deeper if we are going to emerge as a prosperous society. It is now just over a year since I submitted to Parliament government's response to the recommendations of the State Capture Commission. And each time I go to Parliament, the accusation that I have to face, and I'm not blaming you, Chief Justice, because I've often attacked for many things that have nothing to do with you as well, for many others. But the accusation I always have to face is, you're doing nothing about corruption. And I often asked, okay, now to deal with corruption, you've got to investigate corruption. We have institutions that investigate. The president cannot investigate corruption. Because once the president investigates corruption, and once the president arrests those who are corrupt, and once the president prosecutes those who are corrupt, and once the president acts as a judge, then it's time to run for the hills, because it's all lost. I've said my duty as president is to ensure that we strengthen those institutions that should investigate. We also capacitate those institutions that need to arrest and need to prosecute and need to judge. Now, significant progress has been made in implementing a number of measures set out in the response. And of course, the measures may not be all satisfactory to everyone. We have initiated 16 pieces of legislative reforms to address specific recommendations that the State Capture Commission put forward. 8 of these legislative reforms are now before Parliament. Now, our system of legislation is one of the most elongated systems that you can ever think of in the world. It goes through an elaborate process, and most of it is also constitutionally driven. Those who want to challenge then rush to court, and the courts then say, give government a slap on the face that no, you didn't allow consultation sufficiently. You didn't do it in this area, in this area, and this area. And that lengthens that process. So that is the process we have to go through. These bills that are before Parliament address such areas as to tighten up the public procurement process, administrative reform, the conduct of public servants, intelligence services, money laundering and electoral reform. Precisely the matter that Professor Kachali was also talking about. The NPA Amendment Bill, for example, creates a permanent, as I said, investigating directorate for corruption in the NPA with significant investigative powers. The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development has recommended significant reforms to the Protected Disclosures Act and the Witness Protection Act in accordance with the Commission's recommendations on enhancing whistleblower protection. The State Capture Commission made recommendations for the establishment of new institutions to safeguard against state capture. Now, these included the establishment of an independent public procurement anti-corruption agency and a permanent commission on corruption and state capture to create an alternative platform for accountability that there should be, so that if legislative measures fail, there should be enough shock absorbers to enable us to be able to ensure that we address this. These and other proposals are the focus of an intensive process of research and consultation, also by the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council, as you heard. The areas of focus and the diligence that they are paying to their work is really something of legends. And I want to compliment them and to commend them and to thank them. And I want to compliment them and to commend them and to thank them for the work that they do on an unpaid basis. And we haven't resourced them enough. And the criticism that has been leveled against us as government is that we haven't given them enough resources. And Professor, we have heard that, and we will make sure that you are properly resourced as a council, because we want you to do your work properly. So you will be resourced there. Now, while much work has been done, and indeed much work has been done to strengthen the ability of our institutions to prevent and combat corruption, significant progress has been made in bringing to justice those responsible for state capture. Now, obviously, people often say, we want the big noises, the big names. We want to see them in orange, is it orange? Orange overalls. That's what they want. They want to see the big ones. Now, that's true. We want to see that, but I'll come to that in a minute. 9 separate court cases involving 47 individuals and 21 companies have been brought to court. Now, that is progress. Freezing orders amounting to 14 billion rand have been authorized by the Asset Forfeiture Unit, and a total of 5.4 billion has been recovered and returned to the state. Government department, now that is phenomenal progress. Colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, you don't hear of that much in many other countries. I know we need to do more. We actually need to be getting back to that 14 billion. But to have achieved a recovery through the asset forfeiture unit of 5 billion that had been siphoned out of state coffers is a great achievement. Government departments, municipalities, and professional bodies are taking disciplinary action against individuals identified by the Commission. And the SIU, and I authorized that they should go and investigate, come back with a report that has a number of recommendations from arrest, charge, and all that, including disciplinary action. The South African Revenue Service has collected 4.9 billion in unpaid taxes as a result of evidence from the State Capture Commission. So the State Capture Commission, which cost us $1 billion and some change, has more than made its money back. So, Judge, you don't have to feel guilty. While there is a long road ahead, and there is a long road ahead, the fight against corruption is gaining momentum. We obviously, as South Africans, want to see everything done now and today. And I will refer to particular experience of another country in a minute. So this dialogue is a valuable opportunity for us to mobilize all key stakeholders, to mobilize them behind this effort, from civil society, business and labor, to academia, and to ordinary people in our streets and pathways of our rural areas, as well as government and political parties. So we meet here as diverse constituencies, but with a common purpose. Now, I want to refer to the recent paper by a renowned analyst, Mr. J.P. Landman, whose writings I quite enjoy, because he's both critical of what we do in government, but he also acknowledges the progress that we are making. His most recent paper or newsletter, and I want to quote what he said. He says, in 2021, 2 researchers published a paper on a period of rife corruption in the United States between 1865 and 1941. Right. They distilled 4 lessons from that period. Their first finding was that it is possible to make a transition from a systematically corrupt political system to a system in which public corruption is aberrational. Now, some of us who are interested in the history of various countries, which is often depicted either in the bioscopes, movies or videos, as well as in writing, will remember how during a period in America, gangsters and all manner of thugs and thieves were just running riot. So they looked at 1865 to 1941 and said corruption was endemic all over. And the paper specifically rejected the notion that an entrenched culture of corruption is virtually impossible to dislodge. And he writes, South Africans can take comfort from this, because at times we think that what we are going through is unique and many other countries have never gone through it, and we will never get out of this. Secondly, he writes, the US transition away from systematic corruption was incremental, was also uneven and slow. There was no big bang moment. Some you win, some you lose. Again, South Africans can relate to this as we consider the first state capture case, the Nulani case, which the NPA is now appealing, which when the case was lost, everybody just piled criticism on the NPA and said, you see how useless they are, because for a technical reason they had lost a very important case which they are now appealing. And people also talk about the fumbling on TV of the prosecution in the sense of Meiwa trial. And such defeats, he says in his paper, are painful, but are not the story. Thirdly, he says, reduction in systematic corruption coincided with the substantial, that is in the US, with the substantial expansion of government in size and power. That is more resources going into the fight. Beware the budget cuts, he says, for the NPA and courts. That will become alive too. Because the more we shortchange and short budget the NPA and the courts, the more they will not be able to fulfill their mandate. Now here, I think I'm giving an opening to Chief Justice Zondo when he comes to talk to government about more money for the courts. And fourthly, institutional reforms played a key role in the US fight against corruption. Progress involved a combination of direct strategies, such as aggressive arrests and prosecutions, and indirect strategies, such as civil service reform and other institutional changes. Now, South Africa's, he continues, titanic struggle against crime and corruption is not unique. It happened in the US, it happened in Singapore, in Italy, in Ukraine, and China is now fighting the same fight. One lesson from the US experience, he continues, is that progress is incremental. It's also uneven and slow. But there is progress. Money is recovered, in our case, that is, cases that are enrolled, new institutions that are being created, and capacity that is being strengthened is what is happening in South Africa. In the process, values also shift. And this is what we are now seeing unfolding in our own country. And sometimes we think that we're the only ones. And of course, we must hasten and ensure that the fight against corruption goes on. We are here, this summit, to identify further measures that we need to take to build a South Africa that does not allow for corruption or capture. We now know what state capture has done to our country and to our country. And we continue to live through the after effects of state capture. And it is a place where we never want to go back. We are here to strengthen our shared determination to build an ethical society founded on the values of our Constitution. Now, I can only wish you a successful dialogue. And as Professor Kachalia said, that this is a very important moment in the life of our country when we will talk about further strategies that we need to embark upon to fight corruption. And let it be said that the fight against corruption is not only for the SIU, the police, the Hawks, the NPA, or our courts. It's a societal fight. It's not only what the president does, it's all of society. Now, all of us must engage in this. And I want to remind us, the State Capture Commission would most probably never have been appointed had the people of South Africa not stood up and said, enough is enough, it would never have been appointed. And if the people of South Africa had not rallied behind the commission when it was being attacked, and when people, some of them in high clothes, the people of this country said, no, we're not going to. The people of this country said, no, we're not going to allow that. So similarly, the fight against corruption is all of us working together. And I often say, when it comes to crime as well, as I end together, and I often say, when it comes to crime as well, as I end, when it comes to criminality, we've got 95,000 police in our country. We are adding. Between last year and this year, we are going to be adding up to 30,000 even next year. Because our population and ratio and the number of police is out of skew. But those police will never be in every household. They will never be in every street. They will never be in every locale. In the end, the fight against criminality is also a societal one. Now, whenever I'm at rallies, I often tell our people that quite often we know, as communities, we know the people who get involved in criminality. We know them. The people who go and break into people's houses, the people who go and steal. We even know the people who go and rape and murder people. And we don't speak out. And I say it is up to us as well, out to make sure that we root out criminality, working together with the police, working together in community policing forums, where we become the eyes and the ears of our people as a whole. And similarly, when it comes to corruption, it is our duty, all of us. It is a societal challenge, and I hope that this summit is going to come up with a lot of strategies and measures that we need to take to push back on corruption and end corruption in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Justice and Constitutional Development, heads of the National Prosecuting Authority,